321st and the 340th Bomb Groups. We're the 57th Bomb Wing. It was our job to cut Jerry's army from his supplies, isolate them, the big wheels called it. To do that, we had to knock out the road and rail lines to the bases in the German rear areas. The most tender spots in these road and rail lines were the bridges and intersections and marshalling yards that Jerry had the toughest time repairing. And when he did repair them, well, we just went out and plastered them all over again. Yeah, together with 22nd TAC, that's the fighter outfit in our Air Force, we clobbered anything that looked like it might be Tedeschi. All this happened in the winter of 1944-45. North Africa, Sicily, Salerno, and Anzio were history, and now our target was Italy. Our doughboys had battered through the mountains almost up to the knee of the Italian boot. Jerry held everything north of there, and we of the 57th were concentrating on two railroads which led from there right into Germany. There was the famous Brenner Line that the newspapers used to write so much about, and at right angles to it, the east-west line. On these two lines, there were many of those tender spots where we could and did do a lot of damage. San Ambrogio, San Margherita, San Michele, Ora, Brennero, Matrai, Romano di Lombardio, Chiusaforta. Of course, there were a lot more, but brother, the boys are going to remember these names for a long time. Take San Ambrogio. That had three juicy targets in one: a bridge, a marshalling yards, and an electric substation which supplied power for the trains. We made some 18 raids there and dropped over 530 tons of bombs. After VE Day, we found the approaches to the bridge blasted to hell, the marshalling yards completely destroyed, and the power station a wreck. Together with the bombing of the stations at Verona and Trento, this reduced the efficiency of the Brenner Line over 50%. Jerry had to haul and use coal from there on in. And then there was San Margherita. Not quite as juicy as Ambrogio, just a couple of bridges that 11 B-25s from the 319th went after on December 30th of 44. The boys missed the bridge, but they sure laid a few on the approaches that it took a lot of man-hours to clean up. And that counts. A2 up in headquarters estimated that we tied up the equivalent of 11 German divisions in repair and ACAC outfits. Here's another bridge job, San Michele. 3 spans of 300-foot steel across the Adige River, right where we intended to lay our eggs. This was on the 14th of December, and we dropped 34 tons of general-purpose bombs. We kept at this spot ever so often, and it was completely out for the month of March. And that, my friend, created a slight traffic problem for Tedeschi's QM. Ora, another bridge like San Michele, only it goes back across the river. Here it is. Raids like this by the 340th on March 6th kept the bridge non-operational 30% of the time. And that means 30% less food, bullets, and guns up at the front. Or Jerry had to find another way to get them there. Here's a juicy one, Brenner, where Musso used to meet the defunct paper hanger from Austria. We went out after Brenner on March 21st, and believe me, fella, even we were sweating this one out. After we were briefed in the operations shack, we took the trucks out to the field, that little preliminary ride before the big one begins. Most of us were thinking about what the A2 had told us, flak areas, approaches, wind, and so forth. The target wasn't too important, strategically that is, just a marshalling yard. But we wanted to make sure of the job. Just the idea that those two gangsters used to meet there made us anxious to wreck the joint. You know, like a bar that slips you a Mickey and then rolls you. That's about the way we felt about Brenner Railway. Out on the field, we rechecked everything. There was First Lieutenant Lyle Kazel of Blue Island, Illinois, lecturing to a bunch of the guys from the 489th Squadron. Yeah, there's a lot of paperwork went into those airplane rides. One little mistake could cause a lot of trouble for a lot of guys, and there's no use taking chances. But we had to get going, and Captain Hathaway, the 488th Navigator from South Burlington, Vermont, buttoned up his charts. Put on the May-West and buckle up the parachutes, brother. Sometimes Jerry's flak has a way of messing up these little parties. We always had a funny feeling getting ready for a run. Butterflies in the stomach. Something like the feeling you had just before the referee blew the whistle for the kickoff. What did we think about while we were on a mission? Well, most of us were too busy to think, especially the pilots. They always had to keep watching the other ships, particularly if the formation was tight. Of course, there always were some guys who did worry a bit, but then it wasn't exactly like going for a Sunday drive with a wife and kids either. Sometimes Jerry threw phosphorus flak up at us, and that generally meant that we were getting close in on the target. Yeah, we sure plastered Brenner Railway. After the war, we found it almost completely wrecked, and this was the only time we'd hit it. As we flew home, we had plenty of reason to be happy. 2 patterns squarely in the marshalling yard, we'd report. No, nothing to worry about now but prop wash and landings, with some guys even worried about that. There was Matrai, too. The target there was a 110-foot masonry bridge right at the base of the Alps, the furthermost tender spot of the Brenner Line. The boys of the 340th hit this target on April 17th, and what a job those junior birdmen did. The first cluster was off a little to the north, but after that it was beautiful. We could see the bridge crossing the river just north of a road fill, and it seemed like years before the second cluster hit. But when it did, oh, mamma mia. The pattern crossed right over the bridge, blew up the whole structure, and left nice big craters cutting the south approach. On the way home from Matrai, we saw something that was a bit interesting to our A2. You know, Jerry used a lot of tricks to fool our interpreters, and here at Legnano was one of their favorites. One small bridge that we blasted, they didn't even bother to repair. There was another larger one nearby, and it looked like they neglected that one too. But when we took a close look, we discovered that the one apparently missing span could be replaced and the bridge used at night. It was very simple. The missing span was dropped into place by a railroad crane. Oh, don't fool yourself. Those Krauts were smart guys. We did a little job on the east-west line, too. We cracked Romano di Lombardio on the 3rd of March. Hit it with 32 tons of GPs, that's general purpose bombs. Right over the target, we couldn't see so well on account of the cloud, but apparently all 3 patterns smacked the bridge. Later reports said we knocked it out, and Jerry had to start building all over again. We hit Chusa Forte ever so often, too. The 319th laid a few back in December that the Kraut boys won't soon forget. We sent out 3 missions that day and dropped a total of 88 tons, and that's a lot of bombs at 500 pounds apiece. 352 of them were dumped here. Yeah, we could tell you a lot about what we did, but some of the bonds that made up the Kraut brass had a few interesting comments. For instance, Colonel General von Wietinghoff. On the Italian front, all freedom of movement for reserves, tanks, and supplies was denied during the daylight hours. General Hartmann said, damage by light air attacks against railroad and motor transportation was very great. And Major Gallencamp, intelligence officer. By the beginning of 1945, air attacks had reduced railroad traffic in North Italy to an insignificant trickle of supplies. Of course, those guys just wanted to get off easy. But personally, we liked that song a lot better than the ones Goerings and Goebbels used to sing. But make no mistake, brother, there was a lot more to our Air Force than just flying and dropping bombs. It took a lot of supplies and sweat to keep those B-25s in the air. It wasn't like your old Model T back on the farm. A bomber always had to be in tip-top shape. For instance, there was the gasoline. A B-25 takes 974 gallons of gas. and that meant plenty of work for the Joes back at the field. In the last 6 months of the war, the mediums of the 12th Air Force used over 13 million gallons of gasoline. Why, that's the entire capacity of 9 fully loaded tankers that had to cross in convoy. That's almost 274,000 barrels that had to be brought up the Italian boot by truck. And that, my friend, is a lot of work and transportation and gasoline. So we didn't waste much of it, except once in a while to fill our cigarette lighter. Yeah, they took a lot of oil, too, every time the ship returned from a mission. It was a long, dreary job for these men who spent almost 3 years overseas, most of the time gassing up airplanes or eating and sleeping in tents or bombed-out buildings. Each one of our groups had almost 400 men whose only job was to keep these babies in shape. Continual repair and tuning and adjusting. These are the guys who kept us in the air. Sure, the pilots and bombardiers and the crewmen deserve a lot of credit. But my dough is on the ground crewmen who spend hour after hour, month after month, and a job about as glamorous as your football guard who opens the holes for the star halfback. Yes, sir, without these guys, there would have been no 12th Air Force. Then there's the story of bombs. We used quite a few different types. 20-pound frags especially built to kill Tedeschi and his friends. 500-pound general-purpose jobs to wreck his buildings. And 1,000-pound demolition bombs to dig deep and wreck his factories and fortifications. Yeah, the 57th Bomb Wing, that's us, the mediums of the 12th Air Force, use over 7,000 tons of bombs each and every month. And that, like the gasoline, meant a lot of handling and transportation before they finally reached the airplanes, ready to do the actual job. Show you the job some of the ground men did, I'd like to take you over to the 350th Fighter Group and show you Buzzin' Cousin. That was a P-47 piloted by Lieutenant Dick Sulzbach. On its first mission out strafing, Buzzin' Cousin had an argument with some high-flying tree. Well, it got back all right, but with an engine 5 degrees out of line, no two prop blades of the same pitch, and both wings in the cowling roar. Boy, you should have seen those service squadron boys make that ship operational. It was really a treat. This 80th Service Squadron could really do a job. The work they did on this pea shooter is an example. New wings, new props, new landing gear, new engine. Why, those jokers could practically build a new airplane right up at the front line. And don't forget, too, that all these replacement parts had to be transported, stored, and unpacked. And that took time, too. Some of the brass up at headquarters estimated that right here in our own Air Force, it took 30 men on the ground to keep one airplane in the air. 30 men per airplane. Take the engine men. They could tell you what was wrong with an engine just by cocking an ear and listening. And better still, they could make it purr like a contented kitten. Men like Corporal Arnold Bedell from Brooklyn, working with Sergeant Phil Adler from New York. These men were armorers, and they knew everything there was to know about weapons. And there was Sergeant Danny Boy King, pride of Lawrence, Nebraska. Danny Boy's specialty was the .850 calibers on a P-47 and the 425 rounds they each carried. And when it came to bombs, just ask Jimmy Harrison from Kentucky or Jake Krill from New York. Yes, the story of the fighters, just like that of the mediums, was the story of men and supplies. Men and supplies that had a job to do and did it. And it was each man to his job. Some of them repaired airplanes and some loaded bombs, and some of them flew. Novels and movies often make a fighter pilot's job glamorous and wonderful. But to the chickens over in 22nd TAC, it was just another job. I told you about the strategy of the mediums. Well, the chickens, that's what we call the fighters, had a plan too. It was very simple. First, they would knock Jerry out of the sky. Then they'd blow up the enemy airfields. And then, unhindered, they'd clobber anything behind the enemy lines that moved. That was the plan of the fighters, and, brother, they did it. First, they went out after Jerry's aircraft. By now, the whole world knows the story of what happened. In the early days in North Africa, it was more often Jerry going out after them. And then the tables began to turn. In Sicily and southern Italy, there was still enough of the enemy left to make it interesting. But by the time the stage became northern Italy, well, Jerry had made himself pretty scarce. First, you gotta find them. Sometimes they did find them, too. Gun sight aiming point camera film tells that story. Knock them off the ground. And now batter his transportation, his trains and trucks and men. Batter them to hell.